April 1940. The United States Army publishes the field manual for its standard infantry rifle, the M1 Garand, and the manual runs to somewhere north of 200 pages. Chapters on the rifle, chapters on marksmanship, chapters on employment, chapters on care and cleaning. There is one thing not in it. There is no chapter on sniping. There is no sniper. There is no sniper rifle. The word barely appears. 70 years later, the same institution takes delivery of a rifle called the M2010, chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum, and the fact sheet says the system engages targets out to 1,200 meters. 1,200. That is 3/4 of a mile, and it is written in the paperwork as a routine capability. 2 documents, 2 rifles, and 1 country that in 7 decades went from having no sniper on the books to fielding one of the deadliest precision programs in the world. That is not a smooth line. It is not a story of steady improvement. Somewhere between the manual with no sniper in it and the rifle that reaches out 3/4 of a mile, America forgot how to do this twice, gave the whole job to the Marines for a decade, and had to be shamed into learning it again. Alright, so get this. Hold on to 1989, because that is where this turns, and it does not turn the way you were expecting. I am Brett Callahan. I went and read the whole file on the American sniper rifle from 1918 to 2010, and it does not say what the movies have been telling you it says. The screen version of this story is a straight line. American snipers, always great, always feared. Quiet men in ghillie suits, picking off enemies from the tree line since forever. That is the version the films give you, and the games, and the paperback covers with a scoped rifle and a squinting eye. It is not what the record says. It is a story that got simpler every time somebody retold it. Because here's the thing. In 1989, the United States Army did something in writing that it had refused to do for 44 straight years. It reversed itself on a question it had officially settled at the end of the Second World War. It did not announce it. It did not apologize for the interval. It just quietly put out a piece of paper that admitted the previous 44 years had been wrong. So we're going to walk through the requirement, the shape of the problem America was handed and kept refusing to solve. We are going to walk through the trial, and the rifles, and the men who carried them. We are going to walk through the decision that ended it, and then we are going to talk about what 1989 actually said. The problem was old before America ever picked it up. Somewhere out past 400 yards, a rifleman with iron sights becomes a rifleman with hope. The Germans knew this in 1914. The British knew it by 1915. The Americans arrived in France in 1917 holding a training pamphlet that mentioned sniping in about the same tone it mentioned digging latrines, as something the men in the trenches should probably know how to do. The requirement it laid down, in its own flat wording, was that in every organization there should be selected a certain number of picked shots. That was the shape of the American commitment to precision fire in the First World War. The Ordnance Committee in Washington was handed the problem again in 1942, 3 years after the war had started and about 18 months after Pearl Harbor had made it America's War II. They gave it to the arsenals that were already producing the M1903A3 bolt-action rifle. On the 27th of January 1943, the same committee approved the modified rifle for standardization as a sniper's weapon. It was called the M1903A4. It weighed 8 7/10 pounds empty. It carried a 2.5 power commercial hunting scope because that was what could be delivered in quantity that year, and quantity was the whole ballgame. The M1C variant of the Garand, the semi-automatic sniper, weighed 9 9/10 pounds. That is 1 full pound heavier than the bolt action it competed with, and that pound was the entire argument. A pound of extra weight for a rifle that fired faster but could not be built as quickly or as accurately at scale. The Ordnance Committee took both. It could not decide. And that indecision, the American refusal in 1943 to pick a philosophy of sniping and commit to it, is the thing that shaped the next 50 years of this story. 2 rifles, 2 philosophies, 1 country that could not settle on either. Stay with me, because this is where the question changes shape. It stops being what did they build and becomes who decided this and on what evidence. That is the question that runs from here to the end. Every rifle we are about to talk about is somebody's answer to it, and most of the answers were wrong the first time. Before I give you what the trials actually produced, tell me in the comments right now, before you hear it, which side of that 1943 argument you would have been on. The lighter, bolt action, slower and precise, or the heavier semi-auto, faster and complicated. Pick one. And hold on to 1989, because the answer the Army eventually gave surprised everybody, including the Army. By the late 1960s, the American sniper rifle had split into two families, with two different arguments about what the job actually was. The M21, adopted by the Army around 1970, was a modified M14 with a scope. It fed from a detachable box magazine holding 20 rounds. 20 rounds. That is a battle rifle's magazine on a rifle that is meant to be shot one aimed round at a time. The M40, adopted by the Marines in 1966, fed from an internal magazine holding 5 rounds. 5. That 5-round limit is not a limitation. It is a doctrine written into the receiver, a rifle that physically forces the man behind it to slow down, pick the target, and take the shot that matters, because he only has 5 of them. The other axis is speed of bullet. The standard American sniper cartridge from Vietnam forward was the M118 Special Ball Round, 7.62 by 51 mm, leaving the muzzle at about 2,550 feet per second. That put reliable effective fire at somewhere around 800 meters. In 2010, the Army fielded a new sniper cartridge, the MK248 and 300 Winchester Magnum, leaving the muzzle at about 2,960 feet per second. That extra 400 feet per second is what pushed the American sniper's reach from 800 meters to 1,200. The wars in Afghanistan opened up the terrain, and the terrain rewrote the requirement. 1,200 meters. Say that out loud and it sounds like a number. Put it on the ground and it is 3/4 of a mile. That is the distance from home plate at Yankee Stadium to somewhere well past the parking lot. It is longer than most towns are wide, and it is the distance at which, by the paperwork, a modern American sniper is expected to place a bullet inside a chest. Not hope, not aspire, not fire and see. The specification says 1,200 meters is a routine capability. That is what mastered means, on paper. The M24 that the Army adopted in 1988 was a bolt-action rifle, 1 round chambered by hand each time. It weighed 12 1/10 pounds with the scope on it, and the scope was a loopholed 10-power fixed telescopic sight, a tube with lenses that magnifies the target 10 times. The rifle used a Remington 700 action, the same commercial hunting rifle mechanism that had been sold in gun shops for 25 years. That is the mastery. Not exotic, not custom. A commercial rifle action, glass-bedded, the metal cradled tight in the wood, chambered for the standard NATO cartridge. Boring on purpose. That is the version of the story everybody already has. American snipers, American rifles, a straight line from World War II to the global war on terror. Here is what happened next, and it is not in the version. Because the same country that put those rifles together also spent 44 years between 1945 and 1989 actively refusing to train the men who would carry them. The real trial was Vietnam. The Marines got there first, in the doctrinal sense. In 1966, they type classified the M40 rifle, and they built the school at Quantico to go with it. The rifle was a bolt-action Remington 700 in 7.62 by 51, wearing a Redfield 3-9 power variable scope, magnification the shooter could dial from 3 times to 9 times as needed. The 8-power glass the Marines had used in the Second World War was a fixed magnification, no adjustment, and in the jungle, a fixed high magnification is close to useless because the field of view is too narrow to find anything moving. The variable scope on the M40 solved that. 3 power to find, 9 power to shoot. That is the first genuinely American answer to the sniper problem, and it came out of a country that had officially declared it did not need snipers. A ghillie suit is a piece of clothing with hundreds of strips of burlap tied to a net over a jacket. The doctrine, when the Army finally wrote it, described it flat. The ghillie suit is an individually modified camouflage garment that helps the sniper blend into the natural surroundings. What it does not tell you is that a ghillie suit in the sun weighs 15 pounds by mid-afternoon, and every strip of burlap holds water, and inside it a man is cooking. The rifle is wrapped the same way, cloth, burlap, or tape, the manual says, with vegetation attached, because a rifle barrel will flash in sunlight and give the whole hide away. Tactical gloves, thin and unpadded, go on because a bare hand shakes and a padded hand cannot feel the trigger. The Marines proved it in country. Their Scout Snipers, working from those hides, in that suit, wrapping those rifles with that scope, ran up confirmed records that the Marine Corps still talks about. This includes a gunnery sergeant named Carlos Hathcock, whose documented shots at extreme range became the reference point every American sniper would be measured against for the next 30 years. And the record the Marines produced in Vietnam is the reason the M40 stayed in service, in continuously updated variants, for 45 years and counting. That is a rifle that outlasted the war it was built for by 4 decades. Very few weapons in American history do that. The M40 did it because the doctrine the Marines wrote around it turned out to be right. Now the counter case is not weak, and it has to be said. The Army's competing answer, the M21 semi-automatic, put 20 rounds in the magazine against the M40's 5, and in the hands of a designated marksman in a fluid firefight, that 20-round magazine was a real advantage. Some of the men who carried the M21 in Vietnam preferred it precisely for that. 20 against 5 is not a small difference. It is a 4-to-1 difference. That argument never went away, but the M21 had a flaw. It had a flaw that the Marines' rifle did not have, and it was not a flaw in the wood or the steel. It was a flaw in what the United States Army had decided about sniping in 1945 and refused to revisit for 4 straight decades. The flaw was this. Between the end of the Second World War in 1945 and the middle of the 1960s, the United States Army had no institutional sniper. None. The post-war tables of organization and equipment for the Standard Infantry Rifle Company, the paperwork that lists every man and every weapon in the unit, did not have a sniper on them. Not a slot, not a specialty, not a training pipeline, not a rifle held in the arms room for the purpose. The Standard Infantry Field Manual for the M1 Garand ran to well over 200 pages, and the word sniper appears in it about as often as the word cavalry does. 0, or close enough to 0 to round down. That is not a shortage. That is a policy. Here's the part they never taught you in school. That policy, the American Army officially having no snipers, held for 44 straight years, from the German surrender to the day in 1989 when the Army finally, quietly, put out a new field manual that reversed it. That manual, sitting on top of the whole American sniper program from that day forward, opens with a single sentence in its own flat wording. The sniper has special training, equipment, and mission beyond that of the average infantryman. That sentence sounds obvious. Read it again with the 44 years behind it. What that sentence says, in the flat language of the paperwork, is that the United States Army had spent almost half a century pretending it did not need what every other serious army in the world had known it needed since 1915. And in 1989, it stopped pretending. The Army never said so publicly. No public reversal was ever issued. There was no press conference, no admission that the post-war policy had been wrong, no acknowledgement of the 24 years from the drawdown after Korea to the reintroduction of formal training in the mid-70s, in which the institution had produced almost no snipers of its own and had leaned on the Marines to hold the doctrine alive. The paperwork simply changed. A new manual was published. It replaced the silence that had come before it. And nobody's paperwork covered the interval. That is what happened. The Army rewrote itself and did not tell anybody it had done it. The constraint that had produced the silence was budget and it was doctrine. In 1945, the Army looked at the war it had just won and decided the answer to future conflict was massed firepower, artillery, air, mechanized infantry, and that the precise long-range rifleman was a piece of the past. It was cheaper to believe that. Sniper training is expensive per man. A sniper school produces small numbers, slowly. When you are demobilizing 5 million men in 18 months, A small, slow, specialized program is the first thing to get cut. And it was. So for 44 years, when the Army needed a sniper, it did without or borrowed one. In Korea, in the early years of Vietnam, in Grenada, somebody had to carry that. Somebody had to be the man in the rifle company who was expected to reach out past 400 yards with a rack-grade M14 and iron sights, and who had never been trained to do it. Somebody always had to carry that. Once the reversal was in the paperwork, the build-out was fast. The M24 sniper weapon system was type classified in 1988, 1 year before the new manual formalized the doctrine around it, and it became the primary Army sniper rifle for the next 22 years. The Marines, who had never let go of the M40, ran their rifle through a series of upgrades that kept the '66 vintage bolt action relevant through Iraq and Afghanistan. And in 2008, the Army added a semi-automatic sniper platform, the M110 SAS, alongside the bolt action, weighing 13 8/10 pounds against a requirement ceiling of 14 pounds. That 14-pound line is written into the specification, and it is the tightest weight limit any modern sniper program had accepted. By that point, the American sniper program was no longer catching up. It was setting the pace that other armies had to match. The British L-115A3, chambered in 338 Lapua Magnum, was in some ways heavier and longer ranged, and the Russians kept producing the SVD Dragunov, which was really a designated marksman rifle rather than a true sniper, 20-round magazine, semi-automatic, effective out to maybe 600 or 700 meters. Against the American Mk248 load and 300 Winchester Magnum, leaving the muzzle at about 2,960 feet per second, and the 1,200-meter engagement standard the M2010 was written to, the Dragunov was fighting in a different weight class. Score the American sniper program by what it changed rather than by body count, and it is the weapon system that ended the certainty of the enemy fighting position. The rifle that outlasted its own war by 4 full decades, from '66 through the 2010s, 45 years and counting, in a business where 5 is a long life. The M2010, released around 2010, is the rifle that, on paper, made 1,200-meter shots a routine capability rather than a legend. And the ghillie suit, that suit, the rifle wrap, the 10-power glass, the thin tactical gloves, became the visual shorthand for a specific kind of American lethality that had not existed in the paperwork 45 years earlier. So come back to 1989. I told you at the top of this that in 1989 the United States Army did something in writing that it had refused to do for 44 straight years. I told you it did not announce it and did not apologize for the interval, and just quietly put out a piece of paper that reversed the post-war policy. You have heard what the new manual said in its opening sentence. You have not heard what actually caused the reversal. That is the piece I've been holding, and here it is. For most of the 20th century, the reason a modern army adopts something is that it lost the last engagement without it. That is the pattern in the paperwork. Somebody makes a case, somebody signs off, somebody writes the check. The American sniper program does not fit that pattern. There was no single lost engagement in 1989. There was no disaster, no congressional inquiry, no accounting scandal. Vietnam had ended 14 years earlier. Grenada, Panama, the failed Iranian rescue, none of them turned on the presence or absence of a sniper. So what actually forced the reversal was not defeat. It was something more embarrassing. It was the Marines. For 23 years, from 1966 forward, the Marine Corps had held the American sniper program alone. Marine schools, Marine doctrine, Marine rifles, Marine gunnery sergeants, like the ones whose confirmed records had entered the folklore. And by the mid-1980s, the professional gap between a Marine Scout Sniper and an Army rifleman handed a scoped M14 had become impossible to defend. The reversal, when it came, was written in the flat institutional language the Army uses when it does not want to admit anything. The sniper has special training, equipment, and mission beyond that of the average infantryman. That sentence, dated 1989, is the Army finally conceding, without ever using the word, that the Marines had been right for 23 straight years. That changes what mastery means in this story. American mastery of the sniper rifle is not the tale of a superpower that always had the tools. It is the tale of a country that lost the doctrine in 1945, refused to look for it for 2 generations, was quietly held afloat by one branch of its own military for 23 years, and then, in a single new field manual dated 1989, admitted the interval without ever naming it. The 1,200-meter capability of the M2010, released around 2010, sits on top of that admission. Everything American snipers are today, they are on the strength of what one branch would not let die. The numbers don't agree on this one, and I need to say so. Take the semi-auto path, the M21, the modified M14 with a scope, the rifle the Army adopted after Vietnam. One accounting of the Army's decision puts the type classification in 1969. Another puts it in 1970. 1 year apart. 2 figures the record carries, side by side, and nobody has ever reconciled them. It sounds like a footnote. It is not. Because if you were trying to build a timeline of when America started to figure sniping out, 1 year on either side of 1970 changes where the modern program actually starts. What it proves is that 2 different offices were counting 2 different things. One counted the initial decision to build the rifle, one counted the formal Standard A classification that put it on the books as an authorized weapon. The gap between those 2 moments is where a lot of American sniper history lives, and the paperwork has never bothered to close it. Anybody who tells you the date to the day is telling you more than the record does. That is where the file stops. There is a case in a Marine museum with a rifle in it. Bolt action, Remington 700 action, wood stock darkened by 40-plus years of hands and oil. On top of it, a variable power scope with the finish worn off the elevation turret from being dialed and dialed and dialed. On the barrel, faint gray marks, the residue of a wrap that used to be there. Cloth or burlap or tape, the manual is not particular. Somebody, once, taped this rifle up with strips of the local country so it would not flash in the sun. Somebody wore a jacket sewn over with burlap that weighed 15 pounds by afternoon. Somebody put on thin, unpadded gloves because a bare hand shakes. And that man came home, and this rifle is still here. The children walking past the case do not know any of that. They see a rifle behind glass and a small card with a number on it. They do not know it is the rifle that outlasted its own war by 4 decades, or that the country that fielded it forgot the doctrine twice before it kept it. History's better than they made it sound. Come back to me for a second, because there are 2 answers to how America got here, and both of them are defensible. 1, the Marines carried it, the Army finally admitted it, and the reversal was overdue. 2, the post-war Army was right to bet on firepower and only wrong about the margin. Tell me which side of the counter you're standing on. And if somebody in your family carried a scoped rifle in uniform, tell me in the comments what he told you about it, and what he never said. There is another one of these sitting open in the same set of records, and it ends worse. History's better than they made it sound. See you next.